The town shut Hannah Reece out of every quilting frame in the county. Until the winter, her needle was the only thing standing between 3 families and the cold. But that winter was still a long road off, and on this night she only knew the wind. It came down off the Kansas flatland like it meant to take the roof, and she sat alone before a small sheet iron stove, pushing a needle through a quilt top no one had asked her to make. She had laid her husband in the Mercer County ground 2 springs back, and the town still could not decide what to do with a widow who sewed faster than any married woman in it. She heard the church social before she saw it. The creak of wagon springs. A man's laugh, then a woman's, carried thin and brittle across the frozen ruts of the road. The Ladies' Aid was gathering at the Dunmore place, the way they did every second Thursday through the cold months, and her hands went still on the needle as the sound drew closer, wagon after wagon, until she could count them. What did a county do with a woman it would not name? She had turned that question every Thursday for 2 winters and never once caught the bottom of it. The lamps were going up across the road now. Any moment one of those wagons might slow at her gate. None ever had, but she watched the road all the same, listening for the one that might. Across the road, in the lamp-lit front window of the Dunmore parlor, the respectable wives of the town bent together over a quilt frame. 8 pairs of hands. From where Hannah sat she could see the shapes of them moving, the slow dip and rise of needles, and she could very nearly hear the talk that went with the work, the recipes, the news, the small kindnesses traded over cloth. Not one of them had thought to send word to the seamstress 2 doors down. Cora Dunmore, who ran the aid the way a man runs a freight line, by timetable and by will, had seen to that. Hannah did not cry. She had cried enough the first winter, enough for a lifetime, and tears did not warm a house. Instead, she set another stitch, even as a row of fence posts, and she told herself what she always told herself, that warmth did not care who sewed it. A quilt kept a body alive the same whether the maker was welcome at the social or shut out of it. Wool was wool, cold was cold. The cloth had no opinion of her. But she was lying, a little, and she knew it the way you know a seam will not hold before you have even finished pulling it. She bit the thread off close. She had learned, long ago, from a woman now dead, that a quilt was never only cloth, and on a night like this, with someone else's lamplight warm in the window and her own breath fogging the glass, the lesson sat in her chest like a stone she could not swallow. It was Asa Pruitt, the liveryman, who first sent the world to her door that year, though he did not mean to start anything. He came stamping snow off his boots a week after the social she had not been asked to, holding a horse blanket against his chest like a wounded thing. A good Mackinaw blanket, gone at the binding, the wool felted hard in patches and the whole of it stinking of barn and wet leather. His best dray had thrown a shoe and torn the blanket clear across on a nail head, and the animal could not work the winter freight without it. "They say you can fix a thing past fixing," he said, and would not meet her eye, because a respectable man did not stand long in a widow's doorway, and he knew it, and he had come anyway because there was no one else. Hannah took the blanket and read it with her hands before her eyes. "You've let the binding rot. Water got into the edge, and you never dried it proper, so it wicked the wet straight up the weave." She turned it. "I can bind it new," and felt a patching over the tear. "But you'll want more than that, Asa Pruitt. This blanket's lost its loft. You feel how flat it's gone? Pressed down hard in the middle. I feel it's a sorry blanket. It's a cold blanket, same as a man's coat when the stuffing mats down. A blanket and a quilt and a coat all keep heat the one same way, and it isn't the cloth doing it." She pressed the felted patch flat under her thumb. "It's the still air. The little pockets of air caught up in the fibers. That's the dead air, and dead air is the warmest thing there is, warmer than wool, warmer than fur. The cloth's only there to hold the air still so the wind can't carry it off. Let the loft mat down like this and you squeeze the air right out, And then you've got 2 pounds of wet wool and not 1 ounce of warm." Asa watched her hands a moment, and something shifted in his weathered face. The look of a man hearing a thing said plain that he had felt all his life and never had words for. Illy used to say you knew cloth like the preacher knows scripture. Ely said a deal of foolish things, but she said it soft. She carted fresh wool into the matted places, rebound the edge in a doubled binding so the water could not climb it again, and felted a patch over the tear where the needle worked back and forth until the new wool grabbed the old and married to it. When she handed it back, it was thicker in the hand than the day it was sold. He paid her in silver and, without quite deciding to, in something else. He told the next man at the livery that the widow Reece had brought a dead blanket back to life. And the new doctor, up from Wichita 3 days later with a coat worn through and the wind in his teeth, was the next man at the livery. The thaw came late that year and mean. The creeks ran brown and the roads turned to gumbo, and into the middle of it rode Samuel Adler with a black leather bag, a tired bay horse, and a wool coat worn clean through at both elbows. He came to her door because Asa Pruitt had told him the widow Reece could mend anything with a needle. He did not know which widow, or that the town held her at arm's length, or that being seen at her door would cost a man something. He only knew the wind still had teeth in it, and that a doctor with frozen arms was no doctor at all. Hannah turned the coat over in her hands at the doorway, reading it the way she read all cloth, by feel first, then by eye. Good wool underneath, the kind you could not buy west of Kansas City anymore. Ruined by neglect, not by wear. You've worn this clean through to the lining, she said. Both elbows, and the seam under the right arm's let go besides. I've worn it through to the man underneath, he said. He had a tired, even way of speaking, like someone who had said hard things to too many families and learned to say them gently. Can it be saved, or do I freeze respectably? She could have charged him for a whole new coat, and he'd have paid it, green as he was to the country. Instead, she set him at her table and went to work where he could watch. She cut 2 oval patches from a wool remnant she'd been saving, set them over the worn elbows with a saddle stitch run twice around so they would never pull free, and then, because she could not help herself, because a thing worth doing was worth doing whole, she opened the lining across the shoulders and the upper back and worked a thin layer of carded cotton between the coat and the lining, tacking it down in a close grid so it would not bunch. A man doesn't lose his heat at the hands, she told him, not looking up, her needle moving. Folks think he does, because that's where he feels the cold. He loses it here, she touched the back, between the shoulder blades, at the core. So that's where the warmth has to go. You sew like you've thought about it a great deal. I've had the winters to think. She tightened a tack. You're a doctor. You ought to know it better than I do. A man's heart and his lungs sit right here, and the body will burn its own arms to keep them warm before it'll let them chill. So you give the body help where it's trying hardest to hold on, and you don't waste good wool on the parts it's already given up for lost. He was quiet a moment, watching the grid take shape under her hands. That's true, he said slowly. That's true, and I'd never once heard it said by anyone but a physician. Where did you learn it? She told him about Tess, a frame, a sod house, a woman 3 years dead. She used to say a stitch too long is a door you've left open for the cold. I never could make a long stitch after that, even when I wanted to hurry. When he stood to leave, the coat was warmer than it had been the day it was first sewn, and they both knew it. He paid her fair and tipped his hat. He came back the next week with no coat at all to mend, only a reason for calling that he did not bother to invent very well. It was old Tess Holloway who had taught her the truth of it years before, back when Hannah was a green bride off the train from Ohio and could barely turn a hem without leaving a pucker in it. She did not think of Tess often by daylight. But the doctor's questions had stirred her up, and that night the old woman came back whole. Tess was past 70 then, hands knotted as fence wire, a widow herself for 30 years and not ashamed of a minute of it. She ran the only quilting frame in that whole stretch of the county, a 4-bar pine frame her husband had pegged together before the war, suspended from the ceiling of her sawed-in timber house on 4 lengths of cord so it could be raised up out of the way when the day's work was done. Hannah still remembered the smell of that house, lamp oil and dried sage and wood smoke, all of it soaked into the dirt walls. "A quilt is 2 winters of work and 1 winter of mercy," Tess had said, the first afternoon Hannah ever sat beside her. She had a quilt stretched taut in the frame, 3 layers of it. Mind that, the piecing, the cutting, and the joining of the top, all these little blocks that you do alone by candle, all the long cold months when there's nothing else to be done. That's the slow part. That's the part nobody sees. She had laid her palm flat on the stretched cloth then. But this part, the quilting proper, the stitching that catches all 3 layers at once, the piece top, the batting in the middle, the plain backing underneath, and holds them fast so they can't shift apart and let the cold crawl in between. That part we do together, around the frame, in a single day if we can manage it. Hannah, foolish and young, had asked why. Why not each woman finish her own at her own pace, in her own kitchen? Tess had laughed, a dry sound like a corn husk. Because one woman cannot baste a whole top down taut and stitch it clear through before her arms give out and her eyes quit. It would take her a month of evenings, and the batting would bunch and shift the whole time. 8 hands do in a day what 1 hand cannot do in 30. That's the plain arithmetic of it. She had threaded a fresh needle without looking. But that's not the whole of it, girl. The woman who sits alone at the frame is the woman who freezes alone in February. Restitch each other in. The quilt is only the excuse to gather. You remember that, and you'll never want for a roof in a hard year. Forget it, and all the fine stitching in Kansas won't save you when the wind comes. Hannah had not understood it then. She had thought it was just an old woman's talk, the way the old talk to fill a room. She understood it now. 2 springs widowed, her own arms aching from a top she would have to finish alone. Now she understood every word of it. Tess had been 3 years in the ground. There was no frame in the county anymore but the one in the Dunmore parlor, and Hannah was not welcome at it. But Tess's own frame was not gone. It lay broken down to its 4 pine bars in Hannah's shed, wrapped in sacking. Not forgotten, not discarded, only waiting. 4 lengths of pine her husband had pegged before the war, sound as the day they were cut, ready to be hung and corded and stretched the hour someone in this county finally needed what only it could do. Hannah had kept it oiled. A woman did not keep a thing oiled for 3 winters unless some part of her still expected the day it would be wanted. Word reached Cora Dunmore inside of a fortnight that the new doctor had been seen at the widow Reece's door. Twice. The second time without so much as a torn cuff to account for it. Cora did not raise her voice. Cora had never in her life needed to. She set down her teacup in the parlor where the raffle quilt hung half-finished in the frame, and she said, to the 2 women most likely to carry it, that the new doctor seemed a respectable sort, and that a respectable man ought to take care where he let himself be mended, there being widows and widows in this world. The worst things in a small town are always said kindly, over a teacup, with the eyes soft. By Sunday, it had reached the doctor's own ears, and he was new enough to repeat it to Hannah plainly, not yet understanding that in a town this size, a thing like that is not gossip. It is a wound, and it bleeds. But Cora did not stop at the doctor's ears. She went the following week to the church itself, where Samuel had taken 2 rooms behind the parsonage for his practice. She came on a true errand. Her knee had pained her through the wet spring, but she did not leave on the true errand alone. "You'll forgive an old woman her plain speech," she told him, while he wrapped the joint. "There's a woman down the road for me. Sue's like the devil himself taught her. and I'd not be doing my Christian duty if I let you walk into a thing without knowing what folks say of a widow who's never once in 2 years sought the company of decent women." Samuel did not stop rapping, but his hands went slow and deliberate, and when he answered there was an edge under the evenness. "Sod it." He looked up at her then, straight on. "A body cannot seek a company that's bolted the door against her. I've set 100 broken bones, missus. Dunmore and I have yet to find the one that broke itself. Folks say, I'd think hard on who taught folk what to say, and why a grown woman would spend her Christian duty making sure a stranger heard it first." He drew the bandage tight, not roughly, but not gently either. Cora was not a woman to be turned by an edge in a young man's voice. She had outlasted harder. She gathered her shawl unhurried. That a woman who keeps to herself has her reasons. That's all I'll say. I'd not see a young man of standing tangled in something he'd come to regret. You'll thank me one day. He did not thank her. But the seed was in the ground now, and it would grow whether he watered it or not, and Cora went home satisfied that she had done her duty to the order of things, which was the only God she had ever truly served. The Ladies' Aid was, that whole month, stitching a quilt to raffle off for the church roof. The cedar shakes had gone soft, and the congregation sat under a slow drip every time it rained. It was the women's work, and it was good work, the kind they did the proper way, the communal frame in Cora's parlor, the shared labor, the news and the recipes and the home remedies traded across the cloth, the girls of marrying age set down beside their mothers to learn the trade one stitch at a time. The B was the women's own economy, though none of them would have used the word. It was mutual aid stitched into being. A roof raised, a fund filled, a family's barn reshingled, all of it one needle at a time, all of it owed back and forth among them like coin. To be inside that circle was to be safe. To be outside it was to be a name they said softly and did not invite. They simply did not count Hannah among the women who counted, and so the circle closed without her in it. She heard of Cora's warning to the doctor from Samuel himself. She set her needle down in her lap and was quiet a long moment, looking through her window at the Dunmore parlor across the road, where she could see the raffle quilt growing under 8 pairs of hands that were not hers. "They think I'm after your name," she said at last. "Are you?" He asked it without any weight on it, which was its own kind of courage. "I'm after a roof in February. Same as every soul in this county, the doctor included." She nodded at the cloth across the road. "Look at them. They're stitching a whole town warm in that parlor. Funds for the roof, warmth for the winter, a place for every girl in there. That's not vanity what they do, it's the realest thing there is. A woman who's inside that frame never freezes alone." She picked her needle back up. "They've just decided I'm to find out what the other kind of winter feels like. The kind you finish by yourself." Samuel was quiet. "Then I called on you twice. I'd call again, if you'd have it, and let the town think what it likes. You don't know yet what it costs," she said. "A doctor needs the town. The town doesn't need me. Don't spend a thing on my account you'll wish you'd kept. I've buried men who spent their whole lives keeping," he said, "and I never yet saw it warm one of them in the grave." She did not answer that. But she did not tell him to stay away either, and they both noted it. There was a family at the far edge of the section whose trouble would, before the year was out, knit itself into all the rest, though Hannah did not know it yet when she first walked out to them. The Petersons had come the autumn before from somewhere east, a young husband and a younger wife and 3 small children, and they had thrown up a soddy in too much haste against too little time. Greta Peterson was barely 20, big with a 4th child, and she had stopped Hannah on the church road one Sunday, the only soul in the county too new and too desperate to mind the talk, and asked, in broken plain English, could the widow show her how a body kept little ones warm through a Kansas winter? For in the old country, the cold had not been like this cold. Hannah went out to the soddy on a gray forenoon and saw at once that the family was building toward a death without knowing it. The walls were sound enough, but the children slept under thin store blankets gone slick and flat, and the baby's cradle stood against the north wall, where the cold came through the dirt like a hand. "Move the cradle off the wall first," Hannah said. "A foot, even. The wall will draw the warm right out of that child all night. Now show me your blankets." She turned them over. "These are no good to you. They've matted flat. There's no loft left, no air held in them, and a flat blanket is a cold one, no matter how many you pile on. 2 flat blankets are worse than 1 good one, for you sweat under the weight and the damp steals more heat than the wool gives back." Greta's face fell. "We have no money for new. You've money enough for what matters. You've got an old wool coat there, gone past wearing, and a torn comforter, and that sack of clean cotton waste in the corner." Hannah was already pulling things off the shelf. "We'll make the children 1 good quilt out of what you've got. The trick isn't more cloth, Greta. It's the layer between. You lay your batting in the middle, the cotton, the carded wool, whatever holds air, and you trap it tight between a top and a backing, and you stitch it through close so it can't shift and leave a cold channel. That trapped air is the warm thing, not the cloth. The air the cloth holds still." They worked the whole gray day at the little table while the children watched. Hannah pieced fast and let Greta do the slow playing rows under her eye, correcting the girl's hand twice, gentle. And when they hung the new quilt over the children's bed, Hannah stood back and felt the old ache turn over in her chest. For this, the giving of it, the watching a frightened girl learn the thing that would keep her babies breathing till spring, was the only part of her widowhood that had ever felt like anything but cold. "You'll do," she told Greta at the door. "You hold the air still, and you keep the little one off that north wall, and you'll get them through. And next winter you'll show some other green girl how. And that's how it's meant to go." She did not know, walking home through the stubble, that within the season the whole town would be standing where Greta Peterson had stood, green and desperate and out of time, and that there would be only 1 woman in the county who could show them how. The hail came in high summer, the way it does on the plains, with no warning at all, but a sky gone the wrong shade of green and a stillness that made the horses scream in the lots. It lasted under 20 minutes. It was enough. It flattened the Hartley boys' wheat to stubble, and the man wept openly in the road, not caring who saw. It tore the sod roof half off the Peterson place, the very soddy Hannah had warmed, and left Greta and her children, and the new baby, not a month old, under open sky and falling ice. And it found the church, where the cellar window had been left cracked for the air, and it drove water down into the basement 2 inches deep across the floor. There, draped over its frame where the aide had left it between sessions, lay the raffle quilt. 3 months of the whole town's hands. By the time anyone thought of it, it lay soaked through and fouled with mud and cellar grit, the batting gone to gray paste, the careful stitching pulled and puckered past saving. The roof fund drowned with it, and the calendar did not care. Winter was already counting itself down toward them, sooner than a body wanted to believe, and now there were 3 roofs to raise and no money raised at all. The church, the Peterson soddy, the Hartleys ruined down to the seed corn. Cora Dunmore stood in the wet basement in her good shoes with her skirts held up out of the muck, and for the first time in any living memory, Cora Dunmore did not know what to do. There was no money for shakes and no quilt to raise it, and no time to make another the way they had made that one. 8 women, 8 kitchens, 3 months. It could not be done. Not the way she knew how to do things. It was Samuel who said it, because he had come down to see. Could anyone help bail, and he was too new to the country to know it was not his place. He stood in the doorway with his sleeves rolled and water to his ankles, and he said it plainly, to all of them, "There's a woman in this town who sets her stitches finer and faster than any married woman in it. And every one of you knows exactly who she is, The basement went very quiet. Somewhere above them, the loose roof shake knocked once in the wind, and nobody answered him, and the water dripped. Cora did not send for Hannah that day, nor the next. Pride is a slow thing to drown, and Cora's had drawn 3 breaths before it would go under. She tried first every other way. She wrote to a dry goods house in Wichita for the price of a finished quilt and got a number that made her sit down. She tried to start a new top with what women she could gather, and got 2 corners pieced before she understood, with a sick certainty that even working sunrise to dark, they could not stitch a whole new quilt through and raffle it, and order shakes and raise 3 roofs before the first hard freeze. There was not the time. There were not the hands. Not the way she had always done it, slow and proper and apart. It was little Ada who broke her, Cora's own granddaughter, 12 and solemn, who had sat through every meeting of the aid since she was old enough to thread a needle. "Grandmother," Ada said, "the Peterson baby hasn't a roof. You said yourself a soddy canned winter open to the sky." She turned her small even face up. "Is it true the widow Reece sews faster than anybody? Asa Pruitt says she brought a dead blanket back to life." Cora looked at the child a long moment. Then she went to her writing desk and took up a pen, and her hand, that had run the aid by timetable and by will for 30 years, shook once over the paper before it steadied. She did not write an apology. She could not yet manage one. She wrote 4 words and sent them across the road with Ada, because she could not bring herself to carry them herself. "We have need of you." Hannah came, not because she was asked nicely. Cora's pride had sanded the message down to those 4 words and no more. She came because Tess Holloway was 3 years dead, and somebody in this county had to remember what the old woman had known, and it was plain enough by now that it was going to have to be her. She did not come gracious about it. She came with her own brass thimble worn thin at the tip, and her own wax thread, and a back held straight as a fence post, ready to be insulted and ready to leave. But when she saw the ruined quilt laid out on a trestle in the church hall, the seamstress in her grieved before the slighted woman in her could keep on being angry. She had not pieced it, but she knew good work when she touched it, and somebody had done good work on that top. "It can't be saved," Cora said. It was not quite a question. She stood a little apart from the others, her hands folded too tight. "The top can." Hannah ran her fingertips along the seams, pressing, reading. The piecing sound, every block square, every seam true. That was the hard part, the slow part, and whoever did it right. "That we keep." She looked up. "It's the batting that's ruined, and the backing, and all the quilting that held them. That's just dirty thread now. So we strip it back to the top, and we lay in fresh batting and a fresh backing, and we quilt it through again. But not the way you've been doing it." "And what way is that?" Cora said, stiff. 8 women in 8 kitchens. 3 months. Hannah said it without cruelty, which somehow made it land harder. That makes 8 slow quilts, and not one friend among them. 8 pairs of hands around one frame finish in a day what one pair cannot finish in a month. The layers held bar tight the whole time so the batting can't shift and bunch. That's the only way this gets done before the snow. 1 frame, all of us, tomorrow. "We have no frame," said one of the women. "Ours went under the water with the quilt. I have a frame." Hannah said it quietly, and something in the room changed. "I've had one in my shed for 3 years. Tess Holloway's own. 4 pine bars her husband pegged before the war. It's been waiting." They hung Tess Holloway's old 4-bar frame from the ceiling of the Dunmore parlor. The same parlor, the same front window Hannah had watched from across the frozen road, 2 winters running, never asked. Now she stood inside it, and she stretched the salvage top into the frame herself, drew it bar tight, basted it through, and laid the women's hands where they needed to be. There was a long prickling silence when the first of them sat down beside her. The women who had said her name softly for 2 years did not know how to sit at a frame with her. So Hannah did the only thing she knew to break it. She put them to work. She showed the youngest of them first, because the young have no pride to get in the way, the Hartley girl, the Peterson girl, and Cora's own Ada, 12 and solemn, who sat at Hannah's right hand without being told to. Straight up and down, Hannah told them, guiding Ada's small fist, not flat along the cloth. You drive the needle straight down through all 3 layers and bring it straight back up. And that way the one stitch catches the top and the batting and the backing all at once and binds the 3 into one. Stitch it flat and you'll only catch the top, and the layers will part, and the cold gets in where they part. Ada's first row puckered. Hannah picked it out without scolding and set the girl's hand again. The second row held. By the third, the child's stitches were running even, and Ada looked up at her with something Hannah had not been given in this town in a long while. Plain, uncomplicated welcome. Now feel along behind your work. Hannah ran the girl's thumb down a finished seam. Feel for the cold place. The spot where the quiltings run too wide and left a channel. The weather's a patient thing, Ada. It'll find the one gap in a whole winter's stitching and pour through it all season. So you leave no gap. You crowd your rows close. The closer the quilting, the smaller the pockets you trap the air in, and the smaller the pockets, the stiller the air, and the stiller the air, the warmer the quilt. That's the whole secret of it, start to finish. The older women, watching the girls learn it, learned it too, those of them who had quilted 30 years and never once heard the reason for what their mothers had set their hands to. Cora's neighbor whispered to Cora that she had stitched her whole married life without knowing why the rows went close, only that her mother had cuffed her for spacing them wide. And Cora Dunmore, who had presided over that parlor for 3 decades, took her place at the frame across from the widow she had shut out of it, and bent her gray head, and for the first time in 51 years took a lesson at her own table from a woman she had been raised to pity. They quilted the whole top through in a single day, dark to dark, by lamp at the end. It was finer work than the first, and warmer, and every woman in that parlor knew whose hand had set the pace. When it came off the bars at last, soft and whole and close-stitched, no one spoke for a moment. Then Greta Peterson began, very quietly, to cry, because that quilt was the price of the roof over her baby's head, and she had watched it made. The raffle made enough for the church roof, and the women did not stop at the church. It was Hannah who turned it, though she would not have said so. With a frame already hung, and the women already gathered, and the strangeness between them already worn down by a single hard day's work, it was the easiest thing in the world to say, "There's a soddy at the edge of the section, open to the sky, and a baby in it, and we have a frame and we have hands." So the frame did not come down. They pieced through the autumn, fast now, all of them, and they raised the Peterson roof with quilts sold and quilts bartered and one quilt simply given. They raised what they could for the Hartleys against the seed corn they'd lost. The bee that had been one woman's locked parlor became the whole county's, and ran from harvest to first snow, and not a family in the section went into that winter the way they would have without it. Samuel came by the church hall one evening as the women were rolling the bars, and he stood in the doorway watching Hannah laugh at something Ada said, really laugh, a thing he had not seen her do, and he did not say anything at all. He only watched, and Cora, passing him with an armful of backing cloth, paused, and followed his eyes to the widow at the frame and said, low, so only he could hear, "I was wrong about her. I'll say it once to you and then I'll say it to her. Which is harder?" She went on by. It was the nearest thing to a blessing the town had to give, and they both knew it. A week after the church roof went on tight and dry, Cora Dunmore came to Hannah's door, a thing that had simply never happened in the whole time Hannah had lived 2 doors down from her. She stood on the step a moment in her good shawl with the look of a woman swallowing something that did not want to go down. "I was taught," Cora said finally, and stopped and started again. "I was taught that a woman alone is a woman who couldn't keep a husband. That she's to be pitied a little and trusted not at all, and never, ever given a place at the frame, for fear of what a husbandless woman wants." She drew a breath. "My mother taught me that, and her mother taught her. And in 51 years it never once crossed my mind to ask was it true, or who it served, or what it cost the women I shut out of my own parlor." "You went to the doctor about me," Hannah said. Not cruel, just plain the way Hannah said all things. Before he'd hardly hung his shingle. "I did." Cora did not flinch from it. "I'd have you hear me own it, since you know it already. I tried to close that door too, same as I closed the frame. I have spent 30 years closing doors and calling it keeping order." She held out a small folded square, a corner she had cut from the ruined first quilt, washed clean and pressed flat and hemmed. "You stitched this whole town out of a hole I'd sooner have let us all freeze in than ask you for help. I've sat with that a week now. I've been trying to name what kind of warmth it takes to come and help the people who left you out in the cold. And whatever it is not the kind of warmth I was taught." Hannah took the square. Her throat was tight, but her voice came even. "Old Tess Holloway used to say the quilt was only ever the excuse. That the real work, the only work that matters in a winter, is the stitching of each other in. Then I've done it wrong for 30 years. Cara almost smiled. It did not quite reach, but it tried, and the trying was the thing. "There's a frame going up at the church Thursday. The Aid Society would be glad of the fastest hands in the county." A pause. "If she'll have us." It was not an apology, not quite. In Kansas, in those years, between two women like that, it was something better than an apology. It was a place at the frame, offered plain, and a place at the frame was the only currency that ever truly mattered out there. Hannah said she'd bring her own thimble. She married the doctor the following spring. Quietly, the way she did everything, with a quilt of her own piecing turned down on the bed and Ada Dunmore standing up beside her, because there was no one Hannah would rather have had there. Cora came too, and sat in the front, and cried in the plain, unashamed way of a woman who has learned a thing late and is glad to have learned it at all. But that is not the end of it, because a quilt is never the end of anything. A quilt is the part that gets passed on. The winters came on and went, the way they do, and the frame in Hannah's own front room, Tess's old 4-bar frame, recorded and repegged, became the one frame the whole county now turned to. There was a hard satisfaction in that, and Hannah would not pretend otherwise. The same 8 pairs of hands that had bent over their needles, 2 winters running and never once sent word across the road, now came to her threshold to ask. The women who had said her name softly, who had decided she did not count, now counted the days till she could hang the bars. She did not gloat. She did not have to. The fact of it was answer enough. A body could be shut out of every frame in a county and still end as the woman who held the county together. When the soddy burned to the dirt, the frame went up the next morning and the quilt came off it before the family had finished hauling ash. When a new bride stepped down off the eastbound train knowing not one living soul, Hannah Adler was the first to send word and let the old order, the one that had left her out in the cold, watch her do it. Greta Peterson, who had been the green girl once, became the woman who walked out to the next green girl's soddy and moved her cradle off the north wall and showed her how to hold the air still. Ada learned her stitches from Hannah's own hands, and so did the Hartley girls, and a dozen more after them. They grew and they married, and they hung their own frames from their own ceilings, and not one of them ever sat out a winter alone. Because the woman who had taught them would not stand for it, and they had learned that lesson along with the stitch. And when Hannah herself was old, her hands knotted now like fence wire. her front room smelling of lamp oil and dried sage and wood smoke. The very way Tessa's house had smelled all those years before. A young widow came to her door one hard winter, certain she would freeze unwelcome in a town that did not know her name. Hannah handed her a thimble. "Sit down, girl," she said. "A quilt is 2 winters of work and 1 winter of mercy. The piecing you'll do alone, that's the slow part, and nobody sees it, and that's all right. But the holding, the part that keeps the cold from crawling in between, that part we have always done together. Always. We stitch each other in. The quilt is only the excuse. And that is the truth they kept warm on the Kansas plains, 1 needle at a time, and pass hand to hand to this day, that the cloth was never the point, and no soul on this earth was ever meant to finish a winter alone.